All right, it is high noon here in Binghamton, so we are ready to start the webinar. Welcome to Hit the Ground Running. I'm Steve Seepersod coming to you from the campus of Binghamton University. And on behalf of the Alumni Association, I am pleased to welcome you to today's program, which is part of the Binghamton Learning Network webinar series, which itself is just one of many lifelong learning offerings we have available through the Alumni Association. After the show, check us out at binghamton.edu/alumni. The address is right there at the bottom of the screen. That is the link to take you to the homepage of the Alumni Association. You can see the many things that we offer, from live and virtual events to volunteer opportunities to affinity groups, chapters, lifelong learning offerings, and alumni benefits. A lot of great stuff available there on the website, so do check it out when you have a chance. Binghamton.edu/alumni. Pleased to have you as part of the webinar today. Hit the ground running. So before we begin and before I introduce our featured speaker, just a little bit of housekeeping. So questions are certainly welcome. They are part of the fuel that keeps the webinar going. So send in your questions. You can email me during the program. I'm going to be putting this address up from time to time on this little banner graphic. You can email me with questions, start whenever you want. Or if you're watching on Facebook or the microsite and find the comment box, send in your questions as comments, and we'll roll them in during the program. So we like to keep it fun, like to keep it interactive, mixing in questions during the program rather than saving them to the end. Definitely want this to be a lively, interactive, fun, and informative presentation. And our presenter today is all about all of that. So we will bring him in here in just a second. So talking about hit the ground running, and what this program is meant to do is to give advice for anyone who is starting a job, if you're about to start a job, or if you're new into a role. The first 90 days or so are really, really critical to setting yourself up for success, positioning yourself for a possible promotion, recession proofing your career, helping you to build a strong relationship with the people that you're working with, building a strong relationship with your immediate supervisor and people who are very important in the organization. These are the things we're going to be talking about in some detail today. And so at this point, I am very pleased to bring in our featured speaker from the class of 1995. Joining us from New York City today is Alan Stein of Kadima Careers. Has a great deal of private sector experience that he brings in from several different large employers, and that's for the benefit of the clients that he works with as he helps them to position themselves for success in their roles, recession proofing their careers, helping them to move up the ladder, whatever it is that they have as a goal. He's all about helping them to get there, very passionate about wanting to help other Binghamton alumni. And we're very pleased and very thankful, Alan, that you're here with us today. So I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate being here. And yes, I am Binghamton alum, 1995. So I'm probably aging many of you here, but I don't know. Anyway, thanks a lot for joining. As you can see on the slide, hopefully you can see that here. Please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active there and always like connecting with fellow Bearcats, or as we used to call them when I was there, Colonials. So, and I got some swag here, my Binghamton swag. I got Kadima swag. I don't know if anyone can put anything in chat here, but does anyone know what the acronym SWAG actually stands for? SWAG. It's actually an acronym. Can people put stuff in the chat, or is that not possible, Steve?
We could. We may see a little bit of a delay in that happening, as I think we tend to get the questions a little bit later on in the program and comments, but might as well just throw it out there. We'll see what comes, and I'm sure somebody will answer.
When we get to the Q&A, people can, if anyone knows what swag is without Googling it, do not Google it or use ChatGPT. So with that, let's go through presentation. So what I'll talk about today is some actionable tips. You'll learn a little bit from someone who has had a lot of a long career path, lots of different companies. At the end, for those that stay, you will get a free cheat sheet as well of what to do in your first 90 days in a job. And I always like the Q&A part, as Steve encourages as well. So that is my favorite part of these sort of presentations. When I used to work at Facebook, or now called Meta, but when I was there, it was called Facebook. Sheryl Sandberg, who was a COO then, used to say that your career is not a ladder, but rather a jungle gym. And I really like that analogy. So my career jungle gym took me from Binghamton, where I was a psych major. I thought I was going to get a PhD in psychology. I dropped out of a PhD program at Delaware to go work on Wall Street. After Wall Street, I worked in venture capital. I read the book Moneyball by Michael Lewis, and I was like, I want to be Billy Beane. And so I wound up figuring out a way to get into baseball. I worked for the New York Mets minor league affiliates and here in Brooklyn, and the Toronto Blue Jays minor league affiliate based in New Haven, Connecticut. After that, I realized that the work sucked, the pay sucked, so I decided to go back to business school, and I went to school also in New York at Columbia. And after there, I went into a marketing and sales role at American Express for 5.5 years. Realized that the pay was not what I wanted, or I didn't feel I was getting paid what I was worth. And also, I like to move faster, so I looked into tech. I actually got referred into tech from a Binghamton alum, Ben Sates, who I think graduated in 91. I did not know him at Binghamton, but he wound up being a friend of a friend, got me referred into Google. I still had to interview. 11 interviews later, I worked at Google. Then I took the detour after 5.5 years at Google, I worked at a couple of startups, Andela and Datadog, which was a startup at the time. Realized that the startup world is not all that it's cracked out to be sometimes, and decided to go back to big tech, where I went to Facebook, now called Meta. From there, went to Tableau, which got acquired by Salesforce. And in the fall of 2021, I went all in on Kadima Careers, where I am here to help accelerate careers. So that's a little bit about my jungle gym. Over the course of that time, I have had 21, I've worked at 21 different companies, working for 29 or for 38 different bosses at 29 different jobs. And what I learned throughout that period is the jobs were actually amazing opportunity to learn and grow. And on a 5-point scale, kind of like the Amazon scoring system, I've ranked my average job rating at about a 4.2. But my bosses, on the other hand, come in barely over 3 stars, about 3.1. And I've had a lot of 1-star bosses. So this is not to say that bosses suck, but to say that you can get a lot out of a good job. Even if the boss sucks, you can get a lot out of a bad job if the boss is good. And when both are good, that's amazing. But I've also learned throughout this period that you are going to have a wide variety of different leaders, and you need to almost manage to them more so than they manage you, because most managers are actually not so great for lots of reasons. Another thing I learned throughout my career, which is specifically relevant for this, about how to really think about your career and your long-term career, is when I was at American Express. When I first became a people manager at American Express, they took me and the other new managers through a training where they showed a chart that said that your goal as a manager is to keep an employee engaged and excited for a role, because in the first 6 to 12 months of the role, that employee is providing negative value to the company, because you're learning, you're figuring out how things go, you're inefficient, and your goal as a leader is to keep that employee, that individual contributor, that direct report engaged and learning, so that you as a company, as a manager, can extract value essentially from that person. So it was almost the inverse of this chart that American Express showed me as a new leader. What I took that chart to mean, from my perspective, is when I am new to a job in the first 6 to 12 months, I am learning a lot. I'm growing a lot. I'm being stretched a lot. And I'm getting a lot of value out of that position and out of that company. But after the 1 year mark, you're starting to give value back to the company. And after you're in a role for 18 months, 24 months, at that point, you're not extracting a lot of value from the company. You might get paid, and you might get paid well, but you're not necessarily learning and growing. So because of that, What I have generally advised people to do is kind of like the Verizon ad campaign of new every two. Every 2 years, you should be thinking about going up within the organization in terms of getting promoted or increased scope, over within the organization in terms of functional role, regional role, just stretching yourself. Or if you're not getting that opportunity internally, get the hell out. And this is only if you are trying to optimize for your career and optimize for compensation. There's plenty of reasons why people will want to stay in a role for many years, a long period of time. Maybe you're dealing with a sick child, an elderly parent, or maybe you just want a 9 to 5 job, which is totally fine, and check out of there. That is totally cool. But I usually deal with people that are looking to accelerate their career and grow their career. And if you want to do that, you should think about your career in 2 year increments. As we also talk about hitting the ground running and making the most out of your opportunity, it is really important to think about how your performance is managed, measured, and compensated by your leadership team. So, if I don't know how many managers are in this room versus individual contributors, and how many people have led people at large companies or been part of large companies, but once you get to a company hundreds of people deep, maybe thousands of people deep, you start to have to come up with a system to for performance management. And with that performance management, usually you give an individual feedback, you give them a rating, and it influences their promotion capability or their promotion possibility. Almost every company I've worked at, well, when I worked at American Express, Tableau, Salesforce, Google, Facebook, those five at least, like some of my five most recent companies, they all had a performance management process that assigned you a score. It could be exceeds expectation, it could be greatly exceeds expectation, it could be needs improvement. But the way that they assign these scores is through a process called performance management calibration, where people get in the room and they talk about you and they say that based on your results and based on your level, you should receive a exceeds expectation, or you should receive a unacceptable, or whatever euphemism the company uses. But you need to understand that if you are working for an organization that gives you regular performance management review, if you get a rating once every 6 months, once every year, when I was at Google, it was once a quarter, which was crazy. They since changed that to every half year, now every year. You have to understand that part of that rating will be based on meritocracy and what you actually did, but but lots of that are very politically driven as well. So you need to understand what goes on, and I can take questions at the end about how these go. But I've been part of 35 calibrations across those 5 companies, and they are all essentially the same. I've been calibrated myself as well when I've not been in the room, but I've been in the room 35 of those times. Next up. So in the best case scenario, you're in that room and you can fight for yourself and you can advocate for yourself. But the likely scenario, you will be like this little infant trying to get into that room. And there are ways that you can influence that conversation. There are ways that you can earn advocacy, earn support, and make sure that your results and your impact are being effectively conveyed in that room where it happens, where you are often not. So with your career, with your performance management, with your trajectory in your career, there are some things that you can control. You can control the company that you choose to work for. You can choose the work that you choose to do. You can choose the relationships that you actively invest in, develop, and build. You can control how you understand what that system looks like and how that performance management works. There's often a lot of information out there. It may not be easily seen, but you can seek out information from advocates and mentors within the organization, and you control your loyalty. So something that I think I'll share later is most of us, almost everybody, unless you're a unionized employee or unless you an athlete, perhaps, and they're actually unionized employees. Most of us are employed at will, which means that you can be fired for any reason at any time, and you can leave at any reason for any reason at any time. So that is all in your control. There's lots more that you can influence. Influencing by building relationships with those individuals and with those people that can help you and help grow your career. You can work on developing a good relationship with your manager and earning advocacy from that manager. And sometimes it's hard to do with that manager. And if not, you can get out of that situation. It's important also to build relationships and advocacy with your peers, other people that are reporting up into your manager. And it is really critical to build relationships, build relationships and build engagement with people above your manager, because those people also will be in the room. And while I hear myself talking here and I'm coming across as very political, the truth of the matter is, in almost every organization, even small organizations that I worked in, and I've worked in organizations as small as 7 people, as large as 100,000 people, and now Google has 180,000 people, but I think when I left it was about 100,000 people. There are politics at play at every organization I've been part of. A great book that I highly recommend on influence. If anyone has not read this book, you should pick this book up, Influence by Robert Cialdini. If you don't have time to read this, I think it's about a 600-page book. I'd have an autographed copy back behind me. There are 7 factors that lead to your ability to influence others. One is reciprocity. If you give somebody something, they will be more apt to give you something back. Scarcity. So if there's not a lot of you to go around, that will lead to more attractiveness of you. Liking is a big one. I'm not going to go through all these, but I'll cover a few. Liking. If you develop rapport and you get people to like you, they will be more likely to support you and be an advocate for you. And then unity is something that is unfortunately very influential and also it's been very polarizing of late. So if you're a Mets fan versus a Yankee fan, there's some unification there, and that's kind of a little bit whimsical. But if you're a Democrat and a Republican, you reject everything of the other party and you just align with your common party. So it's almost like a tribalism, this unity. But if you can find that unification with people within the organization, maybe they're a new mother like you, or maybe they are part of an employee resource group like the Black Google Network, or different sort of groups. You can build influence, build relationships through knowing that commonality. And it is important to understand how to influence within that org. And what I always advise my clients to do is understand the org chart. So what I showed here is an org chart of Google. I just picked this off of theinformation.com, which is a great site, especially for folks that are interested in tech. And I help people all over the place, but I just enjoy the tech space myself, and it's quite lucrative. It's important to know who you report up to, who else is reporting up to those people, and who is reporting above you, who are your cross-functional stakeholders. When I was at Facebook, we used to call them XFNs, cross-functional network. It's important to know who is in your universe, who is directly maybe the decision maker for some of the things that you do, who influences those decisions, who can put the kibosh on those decisions. So it's really critical to know that, build those relationships so that when push comes to shove, you have relationships to rely on that you've invested in, and then you can activate that when needed.
Alan, I'll jump in with a question if you don't mind, and if it's
Sure.
something that you're going to come to a little bit later, I'll certainly be patient to wait for the answer. But in thinking through this whole idea of building relationships, what advice would you have for somebody who is a little bit more introverted that is going to struggle to, break out of their box, and they'd be happier just getting the work done and putting their head down, and the relationship part is a little bit more difficult for them, and even for some it's intimidating, they find, to deal with an authority figure just because of whatever's in their background that made them conditioned to sort of be afraid of that, which is a totally legitimate thing to feel. What sorts of advice would you have for them? And again, if it's coming later, we'll wait for the
No,
answer.
it's not coming later. Great question. So I'm not necessarily an extrovert or an introvert. I think they call it an ambivert. So like ambidextrous type thing. And for what works for me is more one-on-one conversations rather than going out to a bar. Although I actually like that sometimes too, but it depends on my mood. So one-on-one conversations are less intimidating for me personally. But if you don't want to meet with anybody, you need to think about the job that you take. There's definitely jobs where you can just be in front of your computer all day, or just like if you're an engineer or doing coding or a bank teller. Well, bank tellers, you're dealing with customers. There are jobs that you can do that, but you are likely limiting your opportunity to grow your career if you're not stretching yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, building relationships. And the critical aspect of this is relationships open up opportunity. And not to say that you should use that specifically for um, like just in a selfish manner, but you likely can help other people out too. So you don't need to reach out, but you are significantly limiting yourself by not reaching out. And there are a couple of good books that I would recommend to learn how to do this. One, Dale Carnegie's book. It's a timely, not a timeless, legendary book, How to Influence People and How to Win Friends and Influence People. And then Keith Ferrazzi has a great book also, Never Eat Alone. So it's a learnable skill. When I left Binghamton, I had a very small network, but I've consistently built it over time, and it has paid off in such rich dividends. And I give back as well. So the first question was about if you're an introvert. I think it's okay to be an introvert. It's okay not to go to the parties. It's okay not to be in those big situations. But if you are not going to build relationships with other people in your organization, other people that have control over you and your future, you are going to be handicapping yourself and your potential. And Steve, I think there was another part of the question which I'm forgetting now.
Well, sort of an extension of the question about being introverted and thinking about people who are afraid of authority figures or feel a bit intimidated by that. And sometimes that's just because of interactions with parents when they were younger, or things in their school environment that were negative experiences, or just whatever it is that contributed to that being part of their psyche. It can be a tough thing to deal with, and it can sort of naturally turtle up. And as you said, it makes it hard when you can't develop the relationships with the people who really can affect your future. You're just going to hit that glass ceiling much quicker.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Steve. So people are intimidated by authority, but everybody who's in authority were low down at some point in their career and their life. And you will be surprised how often, if you reach out to somebody in a polite and humble way, that they'll actually be willing to talk to you. When I transitioned into baseball, I called up the front office of the Milwaukee Brewers and got in touch with their general manager on the phone. I was able to email Mark Shapiro he was a GM of the Cleveland Indians at the time, now the Cleveland Guardians. So like you are the risk of reaching out and being ignored is not that bad. Like worst comes to worst, you don't get a response. But the opportunity of getting a response and getting engagement from somebody in at a level of authority in a place where you may want to aspire to go will help you get there so much more efficiently, effectively, and with more insight, that the risk and reward is just worth asking in a nice, humble, and polite manner. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think that's great. And, one thing for me that I've found helpful sort of over the years is that, I tended to at times get hung up on somebody's position. And that's important to be respectful of, and especially if you want to have influence. But I try to separate out and say that person may be X position, but that's not them, the person. Just like me in this role is me doing the webinar, that's not necessarily Steve, the person. So
Yeah.
if that helps somebody, great.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Steve, and something near and dear to people's hearts here at Binghamton. I reached out to Harvey Stenger, the president of Binghamton, and he was super nice. I don't know if folks here have chatted with him, but you should. He's a really good guy. First time I ever met him a couple of weeks ago. And I said, hey, I'd love to talk to you about how I can get more involved with Binghamton. Later today, my next meeting actually at 2:15 today is I'm calling Harvey to talk about how I can get more involved with Binghamton. So I'm speaking to the president of Binghamton. I think that's pretty cool. So you will be surprised on who you can actually get in touch with. So moving on, we're going to talk about layoffs and layoff proofing your career. So you cannot layoff proof your job, but you can layoff proof your career. Let me get to the next slide. So I hinted at previously this term employment at will. Again, unless you are a unionized employee, or maybe in certain countries, you are generally employed at will. And when you sign that contract with Bank of America or with Pfizer or with Binghamton University to work there, I'm guessing with Binghamton as well. Maybe it's a union. I'm not sure about Binghamton, but most companies, you are employed at will. And these companies will write it in the contract. In the case of Google, they write it twice and they do one with all caps. So this was part of a 20-page offer letter that I was helping a client with. But this is just to show you that you are employed at will, which means that company can fire your tush for any reason at any time with no warning whatsoever. But on the flip side, you can leave for any reason at any time with no warning either. And I'm not saying not to give a company 2 weeks warning, and I'm not telling companies that they should not give generous severance packages, but they are not legally required to do that, and you will see all different sort of things. So because of that, what this employment at will affords you as an employee, you as a professional, is to be a free agent and own that free agency. Do not wait for something to be dictated to you from above, but instead own your career. And because of that, I always advise people to ABL, always be looking. Keep your skills fresh. Take every interview that comes in, even if you're not interested in taking it, keep those interview skills fresh. And if it gets to an offer stage, you will get a price point because they will make you an offer, and that will give you a little bit of data validation of what you are actually worth, because you really don't know what you're worth. Most people that I deal with, most clients I work with, totally undervalue what they're worth because they're just seeing it in their own silo and a small sliver of information that you have access to. So getting out there, finding out what else is out there, you don't need to take the offer. I've probably gotten 29 offers in my career, and I've probably turned down just as many. You do not need to accept every offer. You look at each one, just like the company looks at you and they have no problem turning you down. You have the right to turn down an offer. And ideally, you do it in a nice and polite manner. And hopefully, when the company rejects you, they do that as well. They do not always do that. So in order to improve the likelihood that you get some more of this inbound, you can do some reactive things on your LinkedIn profile. And I'll go through this fairly quickly. I do talks on LinkedIn as well, but I'm not going to go into big depth here, except just some high level things. Your profile photo, make sure that you have a photo there. If you choose not to put a photo on LinkedIn, you are suppressing the likelihood that you will get chosen for an interview for a job. There's data out there that a photo alone will make it 13 times more likely to get an interview. And you want to be friendly, you want to be smiling, you want to look at the camera, ideally in clothes that are aligned with the sort of role that you're in. There are things that you can do with your introduction section. You can record your name if it's a difficult name to pronounce. LinkedIn has actually done something there to limit some of the biases that occur, because there is evidence out there for people's names that are difficult to pronounce. Their resume will not get picked because the hiring manager or the recruiter feels uncomfortable saying their name. It's BS, but it happens. It's unconscious or conscious bias that occurs. You can work on your headline. You can choose your You can choose what education to show. You can talk about your location and contact info. One thing that not everybody does, but I highly recommend, is be approachable on LinkedIn. So you see my profile on the left. You see my email. Anyone can email me, and anyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You see other ways to connect with me. Even my birthday is there. So if anyone wants to wish me a happy birthday in November, that'd be awesome. Then on the other side, you see Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, who owns LinkedIn. So I don't fault him for not being as approachable as I am, but you can't reach out to him. So there's a reason he doesn't have that, and that's cool. Like I'm sure he gets inundated with inbound. But if you are someone that is looking for a job, even if not now, but sometime in the future, make sure you're approachable. The about section. The about section, you have 2,600 characters here. You do not need to use all 2,600 characters. Most people will not look at this, but the first couple of sentences are helpful to clarify who you are and what you do. But realize that most people are not actively going to your profile until they know about you, either because you're applied for a role or someone referred you. So you work on your about section, make sure it's clear. You can run it through ChatGPT and make sure it's conveying what you want, but you don't need to spend super amount of time on this because most people will not actually read it, unfortunately. The experience section. Don't lie. It is very findable. If you say that you work at a company or you work for certain years, that is very knowable. And when they do a background check on you, I have retracted offers from multiple candidates who have lied on their resume and or on LinkedIn. So do not lie. You can choose not to include some things, but anything you include on there, make sure is factually correct. If you're a contractor at a company and it's a well-known company, so maybe you're a contractor or a consultant working for Goldman Sachs, I would put Goldman Sachs on there. Make sure you have the Goldman Sachs logo, but make sure on the profile you are not lying and misleading people and say that you were employed as a contractor there, but you definitely use the Goldman logo. Education. So education allows you to put all your education in there and allows you to select which school to put on there. So no slap in the face to Binghamton, but me going to Columbia Business School gets me a lot more brand equity than Binghamton does, where, like, especially outside of the New York area, people may not have heard of Binghamton. So I choose to put Columbia Business School on there, and you can select which one goes on your profile. So make sure that either Binghamton or a school that you've gotten a master's at or whatever, whichever school you think is most attractive to other people, that you make sure that is the one that is up top. You can reorder those. There's a question here about if you're out of work. Do I put the open to work circle on? Here's the answer. Do what you feel you are most comfortable with. There's inconclusive data out there if it makes you seem very approachable and very open to work, or on the flip side, very desperate and seeking work immediately. So I have inconclusive evidence out there. I'm actually trying to speak with Angela Duckworth and Stephen Dubner from No Stupid Questions to analyze this a little bit more in depth. And actually, I got in touch with Angela Duckworth yesterday via email. So I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to figure this out. But until I get that answer with data, do what you feel works for you and just go wear that badge proudly. If you want to put open to work on there, or if you don't want to put it on there, don't put it on there. But be aware that when you put that circle on there, that open to work, there are two different options that you have as an individual. You can make it open to recruiters only. Recruiters at companies not at your company. So if you are working at Unilever, for example, and you want to say that you're open to work to recruiters, it will make it available to all recruiters on LinkedIn, except for Unilever recruiters. And for most of you who use LinkedIn, you do not have the recruiter license. The recruiter license costs about $9,000 a year. So it's very pricey. Only people that are actually hiring talent have that license. So if you select open to work, recruiter only, which is something I always advise people, always keep open to work on there. I have open to work on there now. I'm running my own company, but if someone calls me up and wants me to be the COO of OpenAI, if Sam Altman calls me and wants me to be the COO of OpenAI, I'll take that call. I don't know. I think that'd be a pretty interesting job. But so I would advise people always to keep it open for recruiters, and then you decide if you want to allow share that with all LinkedIn members, all 930 million LinkedIn members, or not. Once you put that green circle on, it's visible to everybody on the LinkedIn platform. So that's all I have prepared, Steve. For folks that want to know how to hit the ground running, I don't know how many people are new to their job. There's a great book that there's two great books that I recommend for the first 90 days. One is called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins, and the other one is called, I think, The Unspoken Rules by Gorick Ng, NG. Both great books. But if you don't have time to read, or you just want to grab a top 10 sheet, feel free to use a QR code or go to that ridiculously long URL code and download the 10 things to do in your first 90 days at your new job. And also, if folks want to follow me on LinkedIn, I would love that. If you like YouTube, we have a YouTube channel. We have a podcast as well, which is great. I think I've had a couple of Binghamton alum on there, and we have a newsletter. So lots of ways to follow me and Kadima Careers. And with that, Steve, if you want to open it up to questions, I am done talking, and I will take a sip of my coffee.
Well, Alan, thank you very much. And so I've popped back in. I have a couple of questions I wrote down on my own, and then I'll leave this slide up for a bit so people can see the different ways to connect with you. But just going to cover it up partially. That URL at the bottom we'll just cover for a little while. So if you have questions, my email address is at the bottom of the screen. I'll leave this up for a little bit as well so you can get the questions in. And so it's interesting about the profile picture on LinkedIn and the open to work circle or the frame that's on that. And so um, just kind of thinking through how that could be taken by somebody else. And do you think people presume when they see that the person's out of work, or are they, do you think they take it as they're working but they're open to hearing from somebody else? And then does that cause a problem if you're in a role and you say, well, I'm open to work, and like, what, does this person want to leave already? Are they not happy here? Is there like any sort of a downside to doing that?
So in that situation, if you're currently working and you have not been laid off, I would be very careful about putting open to work on there, unless you've had that conversation with your leader and your company that you're looking to leave. So I would not put that on unless you have been laid off, or unless you have had that conversation with people at your company. Because again, once you put that green circle on the right side, 930 million people on LinkedIn will see that. On the left side, I was also open to work there, but I was only showing it to recruiters. So nobody would know, except for recruiters, that I was open to work.
So it was also interesting to look at the tips that you gave on building LinkedIn profiles. It's kind of funny because we were talking off camera about me wearing a shirt and tie. And so I made use of this today, and I'll give a plug for a service we have here on campus. There's an iris photo booth at the Fleischman Center where you can get headshots done. And so I had some headshots done earlier in the year, and then I had a beard for the first half of the year and then shaved it for summer. And I was thinking, well, let me go get my school pictures with my new clean shaven look. And so I went and had headshots done, and I'll update my LinkedIn picture accordingly. But that's something that's available if you're an alum who lives here in the Binghamton area on campus. You know where the Fleischman Center is, the University Union. The Iris photo booth is generously provided by the Alumni Association for anybody that wants to make use of it, and it's totally free of charge. And I can give you a firsthand testimonial that you get some very, very nice looking headshots. Not because I'm in them; they turned out well. It's not like I think I'm beautiful, but you get the idea. The headshots do turn out very nice, and so that's something that's made available by the Alumni Association. And so some of the things are so funny to hear because you would think that you wouldn't have to tell somebody to put a picture because you would think everybody would do that or not to lie. But I mean, do you see that a lot where, people are just, you know, writing things in that just don't have any factual basis and then they get snagged on it later and get an offer withdrawn? I would feel like it's not even worth the risk of doing that.
Uh, Not a lot, but I've seen it done. We've retracted. I recall retracting an offer from a fantastic candidate that we were about to hire at Google, and she said she graduated from a school, not even a top school, not even a school as good as Binghamton, but she did not graduate. She was like 2 credits short, and if she were to be honest about that, would have been totally cool. And then she did that in the resume or LinkedIn, I forget. And then there was someone else that said they worked at a company and he never really worked there. He had like intern there or something. I forget what the deal was. And I fought this because we really liked the candidate, and HR recruiting said no, we will not tolerate this lack of integrity. And even though he said it was a mistake on his resume that or on his LinkedIn profile, that they retracted the offer. And no, I actually stand like I think it was an honest mistake in this guy's case, but that was just a policy we had at that was at Facebook. So don't lie. And then when they questioned him about it, it sounded shady as well. So it seemed I, HR got involved with it. I did not as a hiring manager, but they made the ultimate recommendation. I could have overridden them, but they strongly advised me not to.
Then I think even if the person was hired on, it's not a great
Yeah.
start to their employment term
No,
and make you
definitely not.
nervous about other things to come later. And thinking through some of the things we saw earlier in the presentation, you talked about the one-star boss, and I think all of us, no matter how long you've been in the workforce, have a good idea of people we'd rather not work for at all. And but I'm curious from your side, the attributes that you would consider to be part of a one-star boss, and how do you make the effort to build a relationship with them? Because you still need to try, unless you've just decided that it's just not worth it and you're going to leave. How do you try to build rapport with somebody that you may not really like all that much, if to truth be told?
Yeah, I have always tried. I'm not always good at it. I think I've gotten better throughout the course of time. And some of those times you can develop a better relationship. You can understand what that individual is looking for. You can understand that manager's style. And sometimes you're just like, hey, we're different people. This isn't going to work. What I highly advise is don't fight it. I have tried fighting it before and it has not worked out well for me. So the best thing to do is remove yourself from that situation. So do the minimal that you need to do with that manager. If you don't think that you can influence it either by influencing that individual or if people above that person do not really care what that individual is doing or how they are managing, then figure out a way out of there because it won't end well. I can tell you from several experiences, but I'm happy to go into the detail, but it's really not about me. But there are ways to try to improve the relationship with your manager, but there are some managers that you frankly are just not going to see eye to eye with, and they're not going to be supportive of you, and they're going to hold you back.
Yeah, definitely a situation like that. It sounds like the best course is to exit as gracefully as possible, and even to try to take the person out of the situation and say, we're not going to be friends, but we can work together and be pleasant. And if you can't even have that, then there's almost nothing to build on from the sounds of it, and it's good to go. And you mentioned earlier about calibrations, and you teased that this could be coming up later in the program. So we're a little bit later in the program. So as we wait for some more questions to come in, I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, so calibration is essentially the it's performance management calibration. So if anyone's been in a fraternity or a sorority where there is rush and where you're like thinking about all the people that are trying to get into the fraternity or sorority and what people think of them, it's essentially like that, where everybody at the company, everybody in the organization needs to get a year end or semi annual performance management score. And those scores typically come with compensation. So the company can't reward everybody with an outstanding rating, and they can't. So what happens is there's lots of debate and argument and pontification within these rooms about, oh, what Steve did versus Linda versus Tamika versus Puneet versus whoever. And it's hard to compare people, but ultimately the leadership, like when you were at Google, or when I was at Google or American Express or Tableau or whatever, when they look at the whole organization, they can't slice up the pie of compensation and bonus and equity equal. Well, I guess they can, but these companies try to incent performance. So they have to figure out who falls into what bucket, and based on what bucket you fall within, you will get a certain merit raise increase, you will get a certain bonus, you will get a certain amount of equity distributed to you, you will be more likely to get promoted. And since everybody can't be in the far right side, they need to figure out some system which they pretend to be a meritocracy, they pretend to be very scientific in nature, where they evaluate you. There's some jobs, there's some things where it's very quantifiable. If you're a baseball player, you either got on base or you didn't. You either didn't let a lot of people on base or you did not. But if you are like I was director of programs and operations at Salesforce, how do you compare how I did with my being head of operations and programs versus the 4 other people of my peers that led other programs and operations, but I led it for Tableau and someone else led it for Einstein AI, and other people led it for different areas of Salesforce's business, of Slack and things like that. So it is a very imperfect science that leads to a lot of whoever is advocating the best for the people on their team. So it's very influenceable, very politically driven.
You mentioned imperfect sciences, and it made me think of 360-degree feedback, which I know some people have very strong feelings about. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on that, and especially from the perspective of I'm the employee and I get the feedback and I see comments and I don't know who they're attributed to. Sometimes hard to know how to take it. In another space, I got a letter that was mailed to my house yesterday, unsigned, and a complaint about something. And my first inclination was to throw it away because I felt that if the person wasn't willing to sign their name to the comments, I don't know that I'm willing to read them. So, although I did keep it, so I had a little bit more of an open mind about it than it sounds like. But your thoughts on 360-degree feedback, and how to take that when you see things and you don't know where they come from, and maybe they're not so positive, and how to know what to do with all of that.
Yeah. So here's my 360-degree feedback. My last one when I worked at Salesforce. I love 360-degree feedback. I don't mind that it is anonymous. I actually prefer that it's anonymous because I think that leads to more honest scores. So this I find a hell of a lot more helpful, and it might look a little complicated here, but the fact that I saw that, like, on some of these dimensions, that it showed where I was strong and where I wasn't. Like, for me, it was helpful to know that, and this shows my cross-functional colleagues versus my functional peer versus my manager versus direct reports versus total score. It was helpful for me to know that, hey, some people, especially my cross-functional colleagues, are seeing that I don't win as a team. So they don't see me as collaborative. And this gave me some really good feedback to reach out and develop stronger relationships with some of those cross-functional members. Granted, they were a pain in the ass to work with, but but I realized that I need to reach out for that. And it was also helpful for me to know where there were big differences between what my manager saw. Like here, my manager thought I was a good motivator and champion, and again, my cross-functional stakeholders saw me very differently. So I love 360-degree feedback. It was really helpful for me to grow as a leader. It's a hell of a lot better than the performance management score that I got from my leader. So, and then I got some qualitative feedback as well. And then they did a word bubble here. So this was, I love 360. I love feedback. They say the adage is feedback is a gift. So on that note, anybody here who, I believe when they go to the end of this and they click on here, there is a way for you to give me feedback. And I would love feedback. I think when you go to the here, when you scroll down here, leave feedback, please give me feedback. I read it all, and that's how I get better.
I'll leave that up for a bit so that way people can see it, because I had to slide down for a little bit. But yes, it can be easier for people to give feedback in a 360. I agree, versus telling it to you personally. It's amazing what you get in one space and what you don't get in the other. And um, I'll share one story you may find interesting. That I had this one coworker who's no longer here, but I'd always had this sort of like tension with them, and I didn't really understand why. And then I said, I think you are kind of upset with me about something, and I just want you to tell me what it is. And if there's nothing there and I'm imagining it, then fine, I don't care. But if there is something, just say it and we'll all feel better. And then he told me what it was, and it wasn't even that big a deal, but it was important enough to him that it colored his feeling about me, and he held on to it for so long. And then I didn't, I was totally open to whatever it was, whether it was going to be really horrible or something, kind of in the middle. And I said, I'm totally fine with you telling me that. And I'm glad you shared that, because hopefully we can, improve our relationship. And actually things were much better after that. But that was very difficult. And that was after knowing somebody almost 10 years to draw that out. And many times you don't have that long.
Yeah, it having that feedback, having that dialogue is very helpful. And Steve, if I can address two things that Douglas Green mentioned in the chat
Sure.
here. One, I have not read either of those books, but one of the books he said, "Quit: The Power of Knowing When to Walk Away." I've listened to podcasts with Annie Duke, and I'm a big fan of hers. I forget what she did before, but then she became a championship poker player. I really love how she thinks and her talk, but maybe I'll add that to my list. And I've not read the No Asshole Rule, but I am a big fan of that. What I find, though, is assholes exist at every organization I have ever been at. And if there is not accountability and there is not measurement from above, and there's not ramifications for people being assholes or not being an asshole, assholery will continue. So it will be a beautiful world without assholes, but I think they're here to stay. And you just try to avoid some of their stink.
Sad but true. And as you said, you can only control yourself. And I was really intrigued about what you had on one of the earlier slides. It was point number 3 about in the things that you can control of controlling relationships. And I was curious about how you do that, because you can only control yourself. And, I can control how I respond to things. I can say something to somebody, but I can't control what they're going to do. Like with that colleague where I said, you know, what is it that's bothering you about me? And let's get it out. I can't make him say it. If he doesn't want to tell me, he doesn't have to.
So yeah, there are things that you can control. There's things you can't. Another great Dale Carnegie book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. It's a little bit of a stoic mindset, which Ryan Holiday writes a good book also. The Obstacle is the Way. There are things you can control. You got to be comfortable that most things in life you can't control, and very very few things can you control. Probably more things you can influence, but the vast majority you have no control, no influence over. So you just gotta be comfortable with it. And it probably took me a while to be so, but read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, and I think that will be a game changer.
I had a friend who would always say, Steve, you can't control the universe. And as much as I may try to, I try to dip into that.
Anyone who has kids,
Piece
I
of
can't even
advice.
control my house, let alone the universe.
Definitely agree. As a parent of a 14-year-old, you can't
Yeah.
control
Yeah. Good
a
luck with
lot.
that. Yeah. I
Yeah.
have two 17s and a 15-year-old. Yeah. I, I think they're in school now. I hope they're in school, but I have no control. Well, I can check them out on the phone. I think they're at school now. They better be.
We can use the eye sharing. Hopefully his dot is at the West Middle School in Binghamton, or else I
Yeah.
am not going to be a happy person. So thinking about what you said a couple of answers ago, talking about the calibrations and these processes that were very, very formal to measure somebody's performance, sort of rank order, determine premiums, for lack of a better word, but promotions, merit raises, and such. What should somebody do if they're in a much, much less formal environment where, basically they get told, okay, good job, like there's no evaluation, they want to seek out feedback in a sense of how they're progressing, but the organization is not really set up to do that in a formal way. And so you think things are going fine, but maybe not so much. So what should somebody be doing in that situation to try to get a sense of benchmarking where they're at?
You should still try to understand how compensation works, how promotion works, how career trajectory works at that organization. Who are the key decision makers? Usually, there's one decision maker, and who are the key influencers, and understand how the process works. So look around, see how people are getting promoted, how they're getting more scope, how they're getting more opportunity, and seek out mentorship, seek out advocacy within the organization to understand how the process works. Because every place has a process. They're mostly poorly done. Some of the big organizations have more formal processes. But when I worked for a 7-person venture capital firm or the baseball team, even they had process, or they had systems. The venture capital firm actually had a pretty good process, even though it was 7 people deep, of how to evaluate people. I had like 30 different skill sets I was evaluated on, and they gave me a score from 1 to 4 on each of them. So it's important to understand how people are evaluated, who the key decision makers are, and who the key influencers are. And every organization has all of those things. So that's what I would focus on.
I'm curious if you have a personal story to share. So we have about 4 minutes left. I wanted to make sure I got this before we wrapped up. And certainly, if anybody has any questions, and 1 o'clock is not a hard stop on my end. So feel free to send in questions if you have them. But curious if you could share a story about a manager that you had formed a relationship with that maybe in the beginning seemed like hard to connect with or hard to get along with. You didn't really feel you vibed with them, but were able to turn it around.
Yeah. So let me just go back to my list so I can. Oh, so I would say one of my first managers. This was at Arnold and Bleichorter. So I reported to 2 different managers at this time. I was an equity analyst, and both of them I thought were total a-holes. But one of them actually was just unethical, but he was actually nice and helped grow my career. And I'm not going to go into why he was unethical, but um, yeah, that's why he only got 3 stars and not 5 stars. But he went from 1 star to 3 stars because he actually took an interest in me and my career, and he taught me something that I still think about to this day. His name was Tom. Tom taught me that you should think about your career in these 4 phases, and he said it should be per decade. I think it's a good rule of thumb. So the first decade or the first quadrant of your career, it should be learning. You learn then. Then the next quadrant or quartile of your career, you should be burning. You should be kicking ass. You should be putting in a lot of effort. You should be really burning the midnight oil. The next quadrant, the third quadrant, or the third quartile of your career progression is to burn. So you're like burning. You're kind of like on cruise control, but uh, you're burning. You're earning good money. You're getting good return on your career, but you're just kind of like cruising along. And the fourth quadrant is churn, where you think about your exit package. So it's learn, earn, burn, and churn. So he taught me that, and I was 21 at that time, so I was clearly in my learn quadrant of my career. I still learn now. It's not like you don't learn in each of those areas, but the predominant aspect of each of those quadrants of my career, the learn, burn, earn. Well, no, sorry. It's learn. Oh, wait, sorry. It's learn, then you burn. The second one is burn. The third one is you earn. So all that burning now is like you've put in the hard work. So now you are earning, and then you churn. So Um, and I had some issues with him from a ethical perspective. I won't go into the details here, but generally he was a good guy. He had flaws. Everybody has flaws. Some of his were quite flawish, but I did learn a lot from Tom.
And thinking about various managers I've had along the way, even the ones I'd consider one stars, I'd readily admit that I did learn some things from them, both
Mhm.
what to do or maybe what not to do, but certainly came away from it with something that helped me later on. So I try to see the positive more than the negative in a situation like that, and feel that I was thankful for what I'd learned, and then thankful I work for nicer people.
Yeah. And I see Douglas Green has a question about a few tips if you're one doing the hiring. So I've hired a lot of people in my career. I've interviewed 1,000 people, including probably no, probably 2,000 people, including about 800 people at Google. The best hiring it has been done at Google and Amazon. I think McKinsey does a good job. BCG does a good job. Structured interviewing with unbiased aspects where there's no group think. You're scoring people based on rubrics. There is a really good book. I'm forgetting the name of the book. I think it's if Douglas, if you follow up with me if you're interested, there's a really good book on hiring. I think it's called Ask. Um, I forget the name of the book right now, but there's a really good book about how to interview effectively, how to dig deep on people. Um, so there's lots of things I can talk about on how to hire effectively. Most companies do a really poor job with hiring. And that's why when I work with my clients, I help them understand that hiring is inefficient, it's biased, it's imperfect, but it is very consistent. And there are ways to influence the process because most people that are interviewing you have not interviewed a lot of people because they're not hiring a lot of people and they haven't been trained and there's no quality control in interviewing. So I've interviewed about 2,000 people. I've been interviewed probably 1,000 times myself, and I've seen all different sort of things. But I've seen very consistent processes where there is one decision maker. There are influence people that influence the decision making process, and people do a lot of this same things so that you can kind of backwards engineer how to optimize for that. But for people that are looking how to hire well, there is this book that I can look up if you reach out to me, Douglas, and also you can look at the book How Google Works, I think, or Work Rules. I think it's called Work Rules by Laszlo Bach, and he was the former chief people officer at Google, and he implemented some really good interview practices there, and he shares it all in the book.
So I'll share as we begin to wind things down that this recording will be up on Facebook or on the microsite. So if you'd like to go back and watch anything, or go back to the slide which has Alan's contact information if you want to reach out with a question, this will be available as a resource so you can do any or all of those things. And we're now a little bit past 1 o'clock Eastern, and so we'll go ahead and wind things down. And Alan, I just want to say thank you very much for once again being part of our alumni community to share your expertise. And I know you're very passionate about sharing information and helping people to get better in their careers, whether it's your own clients or people here in the alumni family. And I love that you're going to talk to the president about how to get further involved with the university. And we're always looking for alumni to do just that. You're a great example of that. So thank you so much for being with us today here on the webinar.
Thanks, Steve. And just one last thing for Douglas. Ask is a good book. That's not the one I was thinking of. I just Googled it now. Who? It's by Jeff Smart, Geoff Smart. The book is called Who, WHO.
Great. Thank you, Alan. And thank you, Doug, for all these great questions. Certainly have helped to keep this program going over the last 20 minutes or so with some great questions and comments. And thank you, Alan, again, very much.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.
And thanks to everybody watching. So we are going to take a break for the summer with our webinar series. I'm going to come back in the fall. So I'm already working on two sessions that are going to be in the September-October timeframe. One of them is going to be a career development topic, and the other is going to be on search engine hacking, which may sound kind of interesting or mysterious to you, but one thing I'll say to tease it is it's the biggest cyber threat that you may not have heard of until now, but it's something you'll be hearing a lot more about. And a Binghamton alum is out there getting the information in front of people about this particular cyber threat, and she will be the featured speaker when we schedule that presentation in the fall. So we have two very cool webinars that are in the works for the September-October timeframe, and then come back to homecoming in October, October 13th to the 15th here on campus. Saturday, October 14th, we're going to have our Tier Talks event in person. That's always a great speaker event. And at this point, it's looking like Libby Tucker is going to be our featured speaker. We know she's an enormously popular faculty member, and so be pleased to bring her in front of an audience at the homecoming Tier Talks. So we're going to take a break for the summer, but we've got great stuff planned for the fall. So thanks so much to everyone. And I also want to thank, before we sign off, thank Jen Gabriel, my colleague in the alumni office, with whom I produced this webinar series. She's tremendously positive and helpful to work with. And so just want to recognize her before we sign off for today. So for Jen Gabriel and Alan Stein, I'm Steve Seepersod. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the webinar series.